When the lawyer read my father's will, I didn't cry. I just stared at the polished table where his voice used to echo, waiting for the part I already knew would come, the part where everything, the house, the business, even his watch, went to my brother, Asher. There was a stillness in that room that made every breath feel heavy. My mother's old clock ticked on the wall behind us, the one Dad had refused to throw away even when it stopped working years ago. Now it was ticking again, like it had been waiting for this moment. The final sentence of a story I thought I'd understood. Asher sat beside me, his hands clasped together in fake humility, eyes down but mouth twitching with victory. I'd seen that expression all my life, the one he wore when he'd already won, and he knew I'd stay quiet. I did. At least for that moment. The lawyer's voice droned on, the formalities slicing through the air like slow-moving blades. When it ended, Asher turned to me and whispered, "Don't take it personally, little brother." You know Dad always trusted me with responsibility. That word, responsibility, burned like acid in my throat. Responsibility? He hadn't even visited Dad in his last 2 years. He was too busy managing his projects, which I later found out were just gambling debts covered by family money. I, on the other hand, had been there every morning and every night, lifting Dad when he couldn't walk, feeding him when he forgot how to hold a spoon, talking to him when his voice trembled with regret. And yet, when the time came to divide his world, I was left with nothing but silence. Except, not exactly nothing. 2 nights after the funeral, while I was sorting through his bedside drawer, the one no one else dared to open, I found an envelope. My name was written on it in his shaky handwriting. The letter inside started with 6 words that changed everything. If you're reading this, I was right. I remember sitting there, the ceiling fan turning above me, shadows flickering across the walls. My heart raced as I unfolded the rest of the letter. Dad had known. He had known about the lies, the manipulation, the way Asher had deceived not only him, but all of us. And hidden in those pages was the one thing my brother never expected, the secret Dad left only for me. It wasn't money. It wasn't property. It was the truth, and it was enough to destroy everything Asher thought he'd inherited. But before I tell you what was in that letter, you have to understand how we got here. Because the truth doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It grows quietly in the shadows of years you thought were ordinary. I grew up believing my father loved us both the same. That's what mothers always say, don't they? That a parent's love is equal, that there's no such thing as favorite. But children notice things. We always do. The way a voice softens for one and sharpens for the other. The way praise comes quicker to one name and silence follows the other. For as long as I can remember, Asher was the golden one. He had that easy confidence, the kind that filled rooms before he even entered. He was tall, handsome, and loud in a way that drew people in. He knew how to charm teachers, how to twist every mistake into something forgivable. Dad admired that. He used to say, "A man who can talk his way through a storm will never drown." I was quieter. I liked books, silence, and the smell of rain on the porch. While Asher and Dad spent evenings at the auto shop fixing engines and drinking tea from chipped mugs, I stayed inside with Mom, helping her knead dough or fold laundry. Dad called it soft work. "Your brother's learning how to run things," he'd say. "You should join us sometime. Learn to get your hands dirty." I'd nod, pretending it didn't sting. But every time I did join them, Asher made sure to push me to the edges, handing me rags while he handled the wrench, rolling his eyes when I asked questions. Dad would laugh it off. "Boys will be boys," he'd say, patting Asher's back. When I turned 17, I started working at a small printing shop downtown to save for college. Dad didn't like that either. Why work for someone else when you can learn the family trade? But there was no family trade anymore. The auto shop had been losing money for years. Asher said he had plans to revive it, though no one ever saw them. Mom was the bridge between us. She never took sides. When Dad yelled at me for not joining Asher's schemes, she'd slip into my room afterward with a plate of mango slices and a soft smile. "He means well," she'd say. "He just worries you'll fall behind." I never told her that I felt like I'd already fallen, that no matter what I did, Dad's eyes would always find Asher first. When Mom passed away suddenly, a heart attack, they said, the world lost its balance. Dad was shattered, though he didn't show it. He buried himself in work, in silence, in memories he refused to share. Asher was gone most days, handling things. I stayed at home, keeping the house running, paying the bills, cooking the meals Dad barely touched. Sometimes I'd find him sitting alone on the porch, his tea gone cold, staring at the empty chair beside him. Those were the quiet years, the years no one else saw. I watched his health fade bit by bit. His hands started trembling, his voice weakened, and his temper shortened. But when he looked at Asher, even then, something softened in his eyes. Once I asked him why. Why he always saw something in Asher that I couldn't. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Because he reminds me of me when I was young, reckless but brave." I wanted to ask what that made me. But the words never came out. By the time I was 32, Dad could barely walk. I'd quit my job by then, not that it mattered much, the shop was closing anyway, and moved back in to take care of him. Every morning I'd make him breakfast, boiled eggs, porridge, and tea. I'd help him to the veranda where he'd sit and read the newspaper, even though he couldn't really see the small print anymore. Sometimes he'd doze off mid-sentence, and I'd just sit beside him, watching the sunlight move across his face. He never said thank you, but sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him smiling. That was enough. Asher visited occasionally, always unannounced, always in a rush. He'd kiss Dad's forehead, drop off a bag of medicines, and talk loudly about his new business ideas: a car wash, a dealership, a restaurant. None of them ever lasted, but Dad listened like every word was gold. "Your brother's ambitious," he'd tell me after Asher left. "He's got fire." "You can't teach that." I'd nod and clear the dishes, pretending not to notice the unpaid utility bills piling on the counter. Then came the day everything started to shift. The day Dad asked me to fetch an old photo album from the storage room. It was tucked away behind boxes of spare parts and rusted tools, thick with dust and cobwebs. As I flipped through the pages, I found pictures I'd never seen before. Dad with a woman who wasn't Mom. My first thought was that it was nothing. Maybe an old friend, a coworker. But the way they looked at each other, the way his arm circled her waist, it felt wrong. When I brought the album back, Dad's face turned pale. "Where did you find that?" "In the storage room," I said quietly. I told you to bring the blue album," he snapped, grabbing it from my hands. His fingers trembled as he shoved it aside. This one should have stayed buried. That was the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt, fear. I wanted to ask who she was, but he turned away. The conversation ended there. Still, that moment lodged itself in me like a thorn. I couldn't stop wondering, what was he hiding? I didn't know it then, but that single question would change everything. Because the truth about that photo, and the secret behind it, would one day explain why my father left me nothing. After that day, something in the air shifted between me and Dad. It wasn't hostile exactly, just quieter, like a radio that had lost its signal. We went through our routines as usual: breakfast at 7, his medicines at 9, lunch at 1. But I could feel him watching me sometimes, as though I'd wandered too close to a door he'd spent years keeping locked. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew I'd stepped on a wound he never wanted touched. One evening, as I helped him into bed, he gripped my wrist suddenly. His hand was weak, but his hold was firm. "Some memories aren't meant to be dug up, son," he whispered. His eyes glistened under the yellow bedside light. "Let them rest." I nodded, but the words stayed with me all night. They had the weight of a warning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine and responsibility. The only time I left the house was to buy groceries or refill his prescriptions. Asher barely called. When he did, it was usually to ask for money for the business. He'd say things like, Dad always said you're good with numbers, little brother. Help me out, yeah? And foolishly I did. I gave him small amounts here and there, dipping into what little I'd saved from my printing shop days. I told myself it was temporary, that someday he'd repay me. But I knew better. Dad didn't know about any of it. Or maybe he did and chose not to confront it. He had a way of looking past Asher's faults, as if doing so would somehow erase his own. Sometimes, when I'd help him bathe or shave, he'd tell me stories from his youth. How he'd come to this town with nothing but a wrench and determination. How he'd built the auto shop from the ground up. How he met Mom. She'd brought him tea on a rainy day when he was stranded near her father's house. He never spoke of that other woman in the photograph. Not once. One afternoon, while he napped, I went back to the storage room. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light from the small window. I found the album again, tucked under a pile of newspapers. The woman appeared in several photos, smiling beside Dad at picnics, standing near the old car he once loved, even holding a baby I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. The resemblance between the baby and Asher was uncanny. I froze, my mind spinning. Could it be? No. I closed the album and shoved it back, heart pounding. That couldn't be true. It just couldn't. That night, Dad woke coughing violently. I rushed to his room, helped him sit up, rubbed his back. He waved me off, breathless but stubborn. "I'm fine," he croaked. But I could see he wasn't. We went to the doctor the next morning. After a long examination, the doctor pulled me aside. "Your father's condition is worsening," he said softly. "His heart's weak. He needs rest and care and no stress." I nodded, but inside I felt a weight pressing against my ribs. I wanted to tell him what I'd found, to demand answers. But how could I? How could I risk breaking him when his body was already breaking itself? So I stayed silent. Weeks turned into months. His appetite faded, his energy dwindled. I spent every night by his bedside, reading aloud from his favorite newspaper, even when he'd drift off halfway through. Sometimes he'd wake and call me by his father's name, confusing time and faces. But whenever Asher's name came up, he smiled. Always that same smile, a mix of pride and denial. One Sunday morning, Asher finally showed up. He brought a bouquet of cheap flowers and an expensive wristwatch for himself. "Thought I'd stop by, check on the old man," he said, setting his phone on the nightstand like he was timing his visit. Dad's face lit up when he saw him. "My boy," he said weakly. "You're busy, I know, but it means a lot you came." Asher grinned. "Of course, Dad. You're my hero." I stood near the doorway watching them. There was something hollow in Asher's eyes, the kind of emptiness that knows it's being watched. After a while, he asked to talk to Dad privately. I left the room, but I could hear fragments of their conversation through the thin wall. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll handle everything," Asher said. "I trust you," Dad replied. "Just take care of the house." "And your brother." There was a pause. Then Asher laughed softly. "You know I always will." When I walked him out later, he patted my shoulder. "You're doing great," he said. "Keep up the good work, nurse." The way he said it, nurse, stung more than I wanted to admit. That night, Dad called me over. "You know I never thanked you," he said. "For staying, for putting up with me." I smiled, hiding the lump in my throat. "You don't need to thank me, Dad. I just want you to get better." He nodded weakly, then added something that didn't make sense at the time. "You'll understand someday. Why things are the way they are. Why I had to choose." "Choose what?" I asked. But he'd already drifted off to sleep. Those words echoed in my head for days. Why I had to choose between what? Between who? It wasn't long before I got my answer. And when it came, it broke everything I thought I knew about my family, about love, loyalty, and truth. It began subtly, the way all betrayals do. No shouting, no explosions, no big moments, just whispers of something wrong in the rhythm of everyday life. The first clue came a few days after Asher's visit. Dad had been resting in the lounge, half asleep with the TV murmuring in the background. A real estate commercial flashed on the screen, and out of nowhere, he said, "Asher's doing well, isn't he? He told me he's expanding the business. Maybe I'll finally get to see that new office of his." I looked at him, confused. "What office?" "The one he's setting up downtown," Dad said, eyes lighting up. He showed me some papers, said he'd bought a property under the family's name. I froze. Our family didn't have that kind of money. And the only papers I'd seen lately were the medical bills. I tried to stay calm. "Dad, are you sure? When did he show you that?" He frowned, trying to remember. "A few months ago, maybe, before he left for that trip." Trip. There had been no trip. The last time Asher had gone anywhere, he'd asked me for money to cover business expenses. I forced a smile. "Maybe I'll ask him about it next time." Dad nodded, satisfied, before drifting off again, but the seed had been planted. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching. I checked property records, business registrations, anything that could link Asher's name to new real estate. There was nothing. No office, no expansion, no family business. Just a string of unpaid taxes and a dissolved company under his name. The anger that simmered beneath my ribs wasn't just about the lie. It was about how easily Dad had believed it. The next day, I went to the auto shop. It had been closed for months, the shutters rusted and the sign half hanging. I walked through the dust and silence, past the empty tool racks and oil-stained floors, remembering how Dad's laughter used to fill this space. There was a stack of unopened letters near the desk, all marked final notice. I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be our family's pride, and wondered how Asher could let it all rot while still convincing Dad everything was fine. When I came home, Dad was sitting by the window. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders sunken, his hands trembling slightly as he held a faded photograph of Mom. "She'd hate to see us like this," he murmured. "You and your brother barely talk anymore." I hesitated. "Dad, do you really think Asher's handling everything like he says?" He turned to me sharply, defensive. "Of course. He's got a good head on his shoulders." I wanted to scream. But instead, I said quietly, "All right." That night, I found Asher's number in my phone and stared at it for a long time before calling. He picked up on the third ring, his voice lazy and amused. "Well, look who's alive." "Hey," I said flatly. "Dad mentioned you're expanding the business. Can we talk about that?" There was a pause, too long. Then his voice turned quick. "Oh yeah, that. Not really your kind of thing, bro. Just some investment stuff? Complicated?" "I'd like to understand," I said evenly. "Why?" he snapped. "You're not involved." Dad trusted me with it. That line again. Dad trusted me. I clenched my jaw. "Right," he sighed. "Look, I don't have time for this. Just take care of him, okay? I'm handling the rest." The call ended. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve. If Asher was lying to Dad, I'd find proof. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small inconsistencies. Packages arriving at the house addressed to Dad, documents, envelopes with financial logos, but sealed. Asher would come by briefly, take them, and leave without saying much. When I asked, he said, "Dad's affairs. Nothing for you to worry about." But one morning, I caught him leaving earlier than usual, his face tense. I watched from the window as he tucked something into his coat pocket, the same kind of envelope. That afternoon, while cleaning Dad's room, I noticed the drawer beside his bed wasn't locked for once. Inside was a checkbook, nearly empty, and a letter from the bank. The balance was frighteningly low. My stomach dropped. Dad barely spent any money these days. His medication and groceries were routine. I handled them all. So where had it gone? Later that night, I confronted him gently. "Dad, have you been giving Asher money?" He hesitated. "Just a little. He needed it for the business. It's temporary. How much?" He looked away. "Don't worry about it." I felt my throat tighten. "Dad, please. Tell me." He sighed deeply. "He's your brother. He's trying. Don't make this harder." I wanted to say he's using you. I wanted to shake him and show him the truth. But I couldn't. He was too fragile and I was too tired. That night I sat in the living room long after he'd fallen asleep. The house creaked in the quiet. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows, carrying the faint sound of crickets. For years, I had accepted being the quiet one, the overlooked one. But now, something in me refused to stay quiet any longer. I decided that the next time Asher came over, I'd follow him. I needed to see where he went, and that decision, that single impulsive decision, would uncover the first real piece of the secret Dad had tried so hard to bury. The next time Asher came over, it was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were Dad's good days. He'd usually manage to eat a full breakfast, and the sunlight from the eastern window made the house look almost alive again. Asher arrived in his usual way, breezy, smiling with a paper bag of takeout and a promise to make time more often. He always talked louder when Dad was around, as if to fill the spaces guilt left behind. He stayed for about half an hour, chatting about new investors, big opportunities, and a bright future for the family. I just stood there, pretending to make tea, watching him like someone memorizing the moves of a magician. When he left, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out 5 minutes later. I parked my old bike across the street and followed his car. He drove fast, like he always did, music thumping through his half-broken speakers. He took the main road toward downtown, then turned onto a quieter street lined with small offices and pawn shops. Finally, he stopped in front of a building I didn't recognize, 2 stories tall, with peeling paint and a flickering sign that read Lennon's Bar and Lounge. A bar. He got out, looked around quickly, then went inside. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. When he finally came out, he wasn't alone. Another man followed him, heavyset, wearing a black leather jacket. They talked for a moment near the car, the man's gestures sharp, impatient. Then Asher handed him something, an envelope, thick, sealed, before shaking his hand and driving off. My chest tightened. It wasn't business. It wasn't family. It was debt. I stayed parked there for a while, trying to steady my breathing. The world outside the bar seemed smaller somehow, the air heavier. That night, I didn't tell Dad what I'd seen. How could I? He'd probably defend Asher again, say I'd misunderstood. But I started watching closer. Over the next 2 weeks, Asher's visits became more frequent, always with new excuses, new stories. Each time, Dad would hand him something, a small envelope, a check, sometimes just cash folded into an old handkerchief, and each time, I'd see the same look in Asher's eyes, guilt trying to disguise itself as gratitude. Then, one evening, as I was sorting through Dad's drawer to find his prescription card, I found a document I hadn't seen before. It was a loan agreement. My father's signature was at the bottom, shaky but clear. The amount was large, far larger than anything he could ever repay. And the date? 2 months before Asher's so-called business expansion. I sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper. My throat felt dry, so that was it. Asher hadn't been borrowing from Dad. Dad had borrowed for him. The next day, when Asher stopped by, I decided to test him. Dad was asleep, so I met him at the gate. "Hey," I said casually. "Dad told me about the loan. You should have asked me for help instead. I could have handled some of it." For a second, his face went blank. Then he laughed, too quickly. "Loan? What loan?" "Come on," I said softly. "Don't pretend." His smile tightened. "I don't know what you think you know, but you should stop digging into things that don't concern you." I looked him straight in the eye. "They concern me when Dad's signing things he doesn't understand." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You think you're the smart one, huh? Always the quiet one, watching, judging. But let me tell you something. Dad made his choices. He trusts me. And you? You're just the help." Something in me broke at that word. Help. I didn't reply. I just turned and walked back inside, my heart hammering. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the ticking clock, the groan of the ceiling fan, seemed to press against me. Around midnight, I went to check on Dad. He was awake, sitting upright in bed, staring at something in his hands. It was a photograph, the same one I'd seen before. The woman, the baby. He didn't notice me at first. Then, sensing my presence, he looked up. His eyes were distant, as if he was still caught in another time. "Dad," I said quietly. "Who is she?" He didn't answer at first. He just sighed and rubbed his temples. Then softly he said, "Someone I heard a long time ago." I waited. He didn't continue. "Is that baby Asher?" I asked. His hands trembled slightly. "Go to sleep, son. It's late." He turned away, and I knew the conversation was over, but my mind wouldn't rest. The next morning, I made a call to the local clinic where Asher and I had both been born. The receptionist on the line sounded hesitant when I asked for access to old birth records, but she said she'd check if something could be arranged. A few days later, I got a call back. "We have the files you requested," she said, "but you might want to come in person." When I got there, she handed me 2 files, one under my name, one under Asher's. They looked normal at first. But as I scanned through, something caught my eye. Under Mother's name on Asher's form, it didn't say Layla Malik, my mother. It said Mira Rahman. My hands went cold. I read it again, convinced it was a clerical error. But there it was, in black ink, my father's name the same, the mother's name different. I stood there, staring at those 2 files side by side. The truth hit me like a slow, heavy wave. Asher wasn't my full brother. He was the son of the woman in the photograph, the woman Dad had tried to erase from his past. And suddenly, so many things made sense. The favoritism, the unspoken guilt, the desperate need to protect him no matter what. That night, I didn't confront anyone. I just sat on the porch, watching the moonlight stretch across the courtyard, and whispered to myself the truth I'd never wanted to believe. Dad had been living with a secret all his life, and that secret had shaped mine. I couldn't look at my father the same way after that. Every glance carried new meaning. Every silence between us was heavy with what I knew and what he didn't realize I'd found out. For days, I said nothing. I moved through the house like a ghost, performing the same routines: breakfast, medicine, quiet afternoons. But every word he spoke seemed to come from someone I didn't quite know anymore. How long had he been living with this lie? How many nights had he sat beside my mother, pretending everything was normal? And why had he chosen me, his legitimate son, to live a life of quiet invisibility, while the son of his affair was made into a legacy? It was a cruel irony. That weekend, Asher came by again. He was wearing a new jacket, all leather and arrogance, the kind that screamed, "Money I didn't earn." Dad's face lit up the moment he saw him. "There's my boy," he said warmly. "Come in, come in!" Asher hugged him with that same performative sincerity, then glanced at me. "Still around, huh?" "Somebody has to be," I muttered. Dad frowned slightly. "Be nice, you two." He always said that, as if the tension between us was just brotherly teasing, not decades of buried resentment. After lunch, I excused myself to fetch Dad's medicines, but instead I lingered near the living room doorway. "Listening, Dad," Asher said, lowering his voice. "You should really finalize those documents soon. The lawyer's been calling me nonstop." "What documents?" Dad asked. "The ones about the property," Asher replied quickly. "You said you wanted me to handle the house." My pulse quickened. Dad sounded tired. "We'll discuss it later. My head's not right for that today." "Come on," Asher pressed. "You don't want things to get complicated later." "Better to settle it while you can still—" His voice dropped, but I caught enough. He was pushing Dad to sign something. Something important. I stepped into the room then, pretending I'd just returned. "Medicines here?" Asher's expression flickered. Irritation, then that fake smile again. Perfect timing, as always. He stayed only a few more minutes before leaving. The moment the door closed, I turned to Dad. "Why is Asher talking about property documents?" He looked startled. "He's helping me manage things, just Preparations, in case something happens. In case something happens? I repeated. You mean your will? He didn't answer. Dad, I said softly. Please don't do anything without telling me. I'm the one here with you every day. Asher doesn't— Enough! His voice cracked through the room like thunder. I froze. His eyes burned with something deeper than anger. Guilt. You think you know everything, he said, his voice trembling. You think being here makes you the only one who cares, but you don't understand what it means to make mistakes that never go away. My throat tightened. Then help me understand, Dad. He looked away. Not today, I wanted to shout, to demand the truth. But something about the slump of his shoulders stopped me. He looked small, fragile, like a man who'd already punished himself more than I ever could. Still, the questions clawed at me. That night, when he fell asleep, I went to his study. The drawers were mostly empty, except one, locked with a small brass key. I searched everywhere but couldn't find it. Then I remembered something. Years ago, Mom used to hide spare keys inside her sewing box, a small wooden case that still sat untouched in her wardrobe. I opened it, and there it was, nestled between old buttons and needles. When I unlocked the drawer, the first thing I saw was an envelope marked Confidential, Legal Documents. Inside were copies of his will, the most recent dated only a few weeks earlier. I skimmed the lines and felt my heart plummet. Everything. The house, the shop, the savings, all of it was listed under Asher's name. My name appeared once. To my younger son, I leave my personal belongings and the keepsakes in my study. That was it. I dropped the papers on the desk, trembling. My breath came shallow. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that maybe there was another version, one that made sense. But then I saw a handwritten note clipped to the last page. It was from Dad to the lawyer. Please ensure this remains confidential until my passing. My reasons are my own. I sat there for a long time, staring at that line. My reasons are my own. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was deliberate, calculated. He'd chosen Asher, the son of his affair, over me, the one who'd been by his side when everyone else left. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt hollow, like the air had been pulled from my lungs. When morning came, I couldn't bring myself to face him. I made his breakfast in silence, set it on the table, and walked out. The sun was rising, but everything looked gray. I walked to the old workshop, the one he and Asher had once shared. I sat on the stool where Dad used to rest after long days, his hands black with grease, his smile proud. I thought about Mom, about the years she must have lived without knowing the full truth. Maybe she did know, in her quiet way, and chose to forgive him. That was the kind of woman she was, but I wasn't her. And I couldn't forgive what he'd done. Not yet. By evening, I returned home to find Dad sitting on the porch, waiting. You went out early, he said softly. I needed air, I replied. He nodded, studying me. You found it, didn't you? I froze. The drawer, he said quietly. I heard you last night. I swallowed hard. Then why didn't you stop me? He sighed. Because maybe it's time you knew. He motioned for me to sit. I did, though my hands were shaking. He looked out toward the horizon, the sky streaked orange and purple. What I did wasn't fair to you. I know that. But life isn't always about fairness. It's about consequences. I said nothing. Asher, he's made mistakes, yes. More than you know. But those mistakes are mine too. His mother, Mira, she was part of my past. Before your mother and I married, there were promises made and broken. When Asher was born, I didn't know for certain he was mine. But I couldn't abandon him. So you abandoned me instead? I asked quietly. His lips trembled. No, I just tried to make things right in the only way I knew how. I thought if I gave him enough, maybe I could fix what I broke. And what about me, Dad? He looked at me then, really looked at me. You were the one thing I never had to fix. His words should have comforted me. But they didn't, because love that has to explain itself never feels whole. He reached for my hand, but I couldn't move. I just stared at him, this man I thought I knew, and realized that sometimes the people who raise you can also ruin you without ever meaning to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even after our conversation, my father's words kept replaying in my head. You were the one thing I never had to fix. It sounded beautiful at first. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a consolation prize. Like a pat on the back for being the quiet son, the obedient one, the invisible one. Outside, the rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady, tapping against the window like it was echoing my heartbeat. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness, wondering how many lies a man could carry before they began to crush him. When morning came, the world smelled of wet earth and regret. Dad was weaker that day. His cough was heavier, his voice raspy. I brought him tea, but he barely touched it. He sat in silence, looking out the window until he finally said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I didn't answer. "Your mother never did," he added softly. "She knew. She found out about Mira years ago. But she stayed because of you." The room tilted. My chest tightened. "She knew?" He nodded. "She never said a word to you. Said she didn't want you to grow up hating your brother." I sank into the chair across from him. "So all these years she carried that alone?" He exhaled, long and tired. "We both did. But the guilt? It changed her. It changed me." He paused, coughing hard, clutching his chest. I reached out instinctively, but he waved me off. When he finally caught his breath, he whispered, "I wanted to make things right before I go." That's why I left him the inheritance. I felt something break inside me. By punishing me instead? "It's not punishment," he said. "It's closure. Asher needs the stability. Without it, he'll destroy himself." I leaned forward, my voice shaking. "He's already destroying you, Dad." "He's been taking your money, lying to you, manipulating you. Enough," he shouted, the old authority back in his tone for a split second. Then he winced, gripping his chest again. I froze. His breathing was shallow, uneven. "Dad, don't," he said hoarsely. "You don't understand. You think he's the villain, but you don't see the part I played." He turned his gaze toward the framed photograph of Mom on the dresser. "I broke this family long before you knew what breaking meant." His words hung heavy in the air. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth back at him. But seeing him, frail, fading, the anger melted into something else. A hollow sadness. Because no amount of fury could undo the years already gone. Still, something inside me refused to accept it. There had to be more. Something missing in this story. That night, I called the lawyer listed on the will documents. I told him who I was and asked if there was any other letter or file attached to my father's estate. He hesitated before replying. "Your father did leave an additional envelope," he said slowly. But he instructed me to hand it over only after his passing. My breath caught. "What kind of envelope?" "I'm not at liberty to say. I'm sorry." The call ended, but those words stayed. After his passing, it felt like a cruel countdown. A promise of truth that required death to unlock. Days passed in slow motion. Dad's health declined sharply. Some mornings he couldn't recognize where he was. Other times he'd call me by Asher's name, his mind blurring past and present. I didn't correct him. I just let him believe whatever brought him peace. Then came the night everything collapsed. I woke to the sound of something falling. A dull thud followed by silence. Rushing to his room, I found him on the floor beside the bed, his breathing ragged. His face was pale, eyes glassy. "Dad!" I shouted, lifting him. "Stay with me, please." He tried to speak, his lips trembling. "It's in the drawer," he whispered. "For you." I didn't understand. "What drawer?" His hand twitched weakly toward the nightstand. "Bottom one." I called for help, but even as the ambulance sirens grew closer, I knew. I could feel it in the way his body went still in my arms, the way his eyes stopped searching for something unseen. By the time they arrived, it was too late. He was gone. The next hours blurred. neighbors coming, relatives calling, Asher arriving with that perfect mask of grief he always wore. He hugged me tightly, tears welling up just enough to look real. "He was a great man," he said softly. I said nothing. After everyone left, I went back to the room. The bed was empty now, cold. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums inside your ears. I knelt beside the nightstand and pulled open the bottom drawer. At first, it was empty. Just a few folded handkerchiefs, an old watch, and a small wooden box. Inside the box was a single envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in my father's shaky handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of his cologne and something older, something final. "My son, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to explain myself. I know what you've seen, what you've learned, and what you must think of me. But before you decide who I was, I need you to know the truth. Asher is your brother, not by blood, but by choice. His mother left him when he was 10. I took him in because I couldn't live with what I'd done to her. I told your mother the truth years later. She forgave me, though she never said it out loud. You must understand something. Asher never asked to be part of my mistakes. He grew up chasing a love that wasn't his fault to crave. That's why I tried to give him what he'd been denied, a sense of belonging, even if it meant taking from you. The will doesn't define my love. It defines my guilt. But there's one thing Asher doesn't know, and I need you to decide whether he ever should. Go to the workshop. Beneath the old floorboard under my chair, you'll find a metal box. What's inside belongs to the person who truly carries my name with honor." I read those words again and again, tears blurring the ink. I didn't know what I felt. Anger, grief, or something heavier than both. For so long, I'd wanted answers. Now that I had them, they felt like a curse. The next morning, before the lawyer's meeting to read the will, I went to the workshop. The air smelled of rust and memories. I found the chair he'd mentioned, the one where he used to sit smoking after long days. I knelt beside it, pried open the floorboard, and there it was, a small metal box, dusty and locked with a tiny latch. Inside, I found a second envelope, thicker than the first. And inside that envelope, a set of documents. They weren't financial papers. They were confession letters, written to my mother, and what they contained would change everything I thought I knew about my father, and about the inheritance Asher thought was his. The morning after the funeral, the world felt muted. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. The air carried that strange silence that follows death. Not peace, not pain, just absence. Asher was in the living room, on the phone, speaking to someone with his usual animated charm. I could hear him laughing softly, pretending to grieve while setting up appointments with the lawyer. The hypocrisy of it made my skin crawl. I was in Dad's old workshop, the metal box still open on the workbench in front of me. The letters were neatly stacked, tied with a faded red ribbon. The paper had yellowed with age, but Dad's handwriting was unmistakable. Firm at first, then shakier in the later pages. I untied the ribbon and began to read. "My dearest Layla, I've lived with the weight of this secret for too long. Mira came to see me before our wedding. She told me she was pregnant, but I refused to believe her. I told myself it was her way of holding on to me, and I walked away. When Asher was born, I sent money quietly, convincing myself it was enough. But it wasn't. When I saw him years later, lost, hungry, and alone after she died, I knew what I'd done. I couldn't let him disappear into the world I'd helped create. So I brought him home. You didn't have to accept him, but you did. And I will never forgive myself for what that cost you." I stopped reading, my hands trembling. So it was true. Every suspicion, every half-whispered thought. It was all real. Asher wasn't just a symbol of my father's guilt. He was his guilt, made flesh, brought home, raised under the same roof where my mother had swallowed her pain in silence. I turned to the next letter. "Layla, when the time comes, I'll make sure both boys are taken care of. But I fear I've already damaged one beyond repair, the one who never asked for anything, who gave without resentment. If there's any justice left in me, I'll find a way to make it right even if no one sees it. My heart pounded. Make it right. I shuffled through the rest of the papers, old receipts, copies of property deeds, and finally, one official-looking document, a transfer form for the workshop property, signed and dated only a month before his death, but the recipient's name wasn't Asher's. It was mine. My breath caught. I stared at it, unable to move. Dad had left the workshop, his pride, his legacy, to me, quietly, without telling anyone. It wasn't much compared to the inheritance Asher was about to receive, but it was symbolic. It meant something. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than confusion. I felt purpose. That night, while the house slept, I sat at the dining table with the papers spread before me. I thought about the years I'd spent caring for Dad, the nights I'd sat awake listening to him breathe, the mornings I'd watched him crumble piece by piece. He hadn't been a perfect man. But in his own broken way, he'd tried to leave something behind, something only I could understand. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. At noon, we sat in the lawyer's office. The room was cold, lined with shelves of old books and the faint hum of an air conditioner. The lawyer read from the will in a voice that sounded too steady for such a moment. As per the last will and testament of Mr. Rashid Malik, he began, all assets, including the family home, business accounts and remaining estate are to be transferred to his eldest son, Mr. Asher Malik. Asher nodded solemnly, his expression a perfect mask of grief and entitlement. Then the lawyer turned to me. Mr. Armin Malik, your father left you his personal belongings and the contents of his private study. Asher glanced at me, smirking slightly. Guess he thought you'd enjoy the books and photo albums. I didn't respond. The lawyer continued. However, there's also a sealed letter addressed to Mr. Armin, to be delivered immediately after the reading. Asher frowned. A letter? Yes, the lawyer said. Mr. Malik was very specific about that. He handed me the envelope, heavy, sealed with wax, my name written in Dad's unmistakable script. Asher leaned forward. What's that about? I don't know, I said quietly. The lawyer stood. That concludes the reading. Asher was already reaching for the property documents, flipping through them with greedy hands. He looked victorious. Well, he said, smirking, I'll make sure everything's taken care of. You can stay here for a few weeks until I sort out the paperwork. That was it, my breaking point. I stood slowly, tucking the envelope into my jacket. You don't get to tell me what to do, Asher. He looked up, eyebrows raised. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said evenly, you've been living off lies for so long that you don't even see the truth anymore. He scoffed. What truth? That Dad loved me more? Everyone knew that. I leaned forward, my voice low and calm. No. The truth that you've been pretending to be his rightful heir, when the one thing he was most ashamed of was you. His face went white. What did you say? I didn't answer. I turned and walked out, leaving him frozen in that room full of false victories. Outside, the sunlight hit my face like a slap. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter somehow, like I'd just stepped off a train I'd been trapped on my whole life. I went straight to the workshop, sat at Dad's old desk, and opened the sealed letter. My son, you will hear that everything has gone to your brother. That's true and on paper. But what I left for you is something far greater. Inside this box are the real ownership papers to the workshop. Asher doesn't know it, but this place, our true family legacy, belongs to you. Do with it what I couldn't. Rebuild it, or let it go. But whatever you choose, don't let anger define you. The truth has a way of punishing those who hide from it. One day you'll know when to reveal what I kept hidden. Until then, stay silent. The right moment will come. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, tears sliding down my face before I even realized I was crying. The right moment would come. But not yet. Not until Asher had to face what he truly inherited. Not wealth. Not legacy, but the truth my father left behind. That night, I couldn't escape the echo of my father's words. The right moment will come. But what moment did he mean? When Asher finally realized what he'd done? When I revealed the secret? Or when the truth would no longer need to hurt anyone? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't let him get away with it. Not after everything he'd done to Dad, to me, to the family name he pretended to honor. For the next few days, Asher was everywhere. He came to the house with papers for me to sign, claiming they were legal formalities. He told me I could stay temporarily until the transfer was complete. He even had the audacity to ask if I'd help manage the workshop, the very place that now belonged to me. I played along. I signed nothing. I smiled when he talked about renovation plans. I nodded when he bragged about new clients and partnerships. But in the background, I was quietly building something else, a record of every lie, every debt, every document he'd forged under Dad's name. I went back to the bar where I'd followed him weeks earlier, pretending to be a potential investor. The bartender recognized his name instantly. "Yeah, he comes around," the man said, wiping the counter. "Always late with payments, but good talker." "Owes Lennon a good bit." "Lennon?" I asked. He nodded toward a photograph pinned behind the bar. The same man I'd seen take the envelope from Asher that night. So that was it. The debts, the pressure, the manipulation. Asher had been bleeding Dad dry to pay off criminals. The truth wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It was about exploitation. I started compiling proof. Copies of Dad's checks, loan documents, and the original letter from the clinic confirming the truth about Asher's parentage. I didn't want revenge, not the kind that destroyed. I wanted truth. Clean. Inevitable. Then, one evening, fate delivered what my father had been waiting for, the right moment. Asher threw a small memorial gathering at the house. It wasn't grief that motivated him. It was performance. The relatives came dressed in solemn black, the air heavy with politeness and hidden greed. He stood near the center of the room, talking loudly about how he planned to honor Dad's legacy by reopening the workshop and continuing the Malik name. I watched him from across the room, the letter and papers tucked inside my coat pocket, my heart thudding like a clock running out of time. When most of the guests had arrived, he cleared his throat. "I just want to thank everyone for being here. My father built everything from nothing, and I intend to make him proud. I'll be taking charge of the estate and the shop starting next week." Murmurs of approval followed. Some relatives patted his back. Others whispered their usual comparisons. Asher, the successful one. Arman, the quiet one. And that's when I stood up. "I think Dad would have wanted everyone to know the truth," I said softly. But the room went still. Asher froze, his smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" I walked forward slowly, holding the folded papers in my hand. "You've been telling everyone you're Dad's rightful heir. But that's not the full story, is it?" He laughed nervously. "Don't start this here, Armin, not tonight." "Why not?" I asked. "You love attention. Here's your audience." The tension was thick enough to touch. I could see the panic flicker behind his eyes. "Dad left me something too," I continued, my voice steady. "A letter. A letter that explained everything." He swallowed hard. "You're bluffing." I opened the paper, not the real one, but a copy. "He told me the truth about your mother, Asher. About how you came into this family. You weren't born into it. You were brought into it out of guilt." A ripple went through the crowd. His face turned red. "Shut up," he hissed. "He raised you like a son," I said louder now. "But you repaid him with lies and debts. You stole from him while he was dying. And now you stand here pretending to be his legacy." He took a step toward me, fists clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." I pulled another paper from my coat, a copy of the bank loan documents with his forged signature. "These say otherwise." The room erupted into murmurs. An aunt gasped. One of the cousins whispered, "Is that true?" Asher looked around wildly, his facade crumbling. "He's lying. He's jealous. Dad trusted me, not him. I stared at him, not with anger, but with something colder. No, Asher, Dad pitied you. That's why he left you everything, because he knew it would destroy you. For a long, suffocating moment, he just stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting between me and the stunned faces around him. Then without a word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the picture frames. The silence that followed was thick. Someone muttered, "I always wondered why Rashid favored him so much." I didn't say another word. I just folded the papers, put them back in my coat, and quietly left the room. Outside, the air was cool, the moon high and indifferent. I leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. It was over. Not cleanly, not neatly, but it was over. Inside, I could still hear the relatives whispering, the sound of Asher's carefully constructed world collapsing piece by piece. And as I walked home that night, I thought of my father, his sins, his silence, his final attempt to make things right. Maybe this was what he'd meant by the right moment. Not revenge, not exposure for cruelty's sake, but the moment truth stepped into the light and every lie began to crumble on its own. The next morning, I received a call from the lawyer. He sounded hesitant, almost cautious. "Mr. Arman," he said, "I thought you should know. Your brother has requested a meeting. He wants to discuss an adjustment to the inheritance terms." I smiled faintly. "I'm not surprised. Should I set it up?" The lawyer asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "Let him come, because this time I wasn't the quiet one anymore. This time, I had the truth, and that was worth more than anything my father could have written into a will." Asher came to see me 2 days later. He didn't call first. He never did. His car pulled into the driveway just as the sun began to dip behind the roofs, painting the sky with tired streaks of orange and gray. I was sitting on the porch, oiling one of Dad's old tools from the workshop, when I heard the familiar slam of his door. He looked different. Not in the way people look after loss, not grief exactly, but deflated, smaller. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and his hair wasn't slicked back the way it always was. The arrogance had drained out of his posture. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, wordlessly, and gestured to the bench beside me. He hesitated, then sat down. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic scraping of the oil rag against the metal wrench. Finally, he broke the silence. "You embarrassed me." I looked up. "No," I said. "You did that to yourself." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't have to do it in front of everyone. You could have talked to me privately." I laughed softly. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the road, unfocused. "I was trying to fix things," he said after a long pause. "Dad trusted me with everything. I thought, if I could pay off the debts, if I could turn things around, maybe he'd finally—" "Finally what?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Finally see me as his real son." The words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For a moment I saw not the manipulative, arrogant brother I'd grown to resent, but a scared boy who'd spent his whole life chasing a love that was never truly his to earn. I put the wrench down and leaned back. "You know, he did see you that way. That's the sad part. He just couldn't stop trying to fix what was broken in himself." He looked at me sharply. "You read the letter, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. He laughed bitterly. "Then you know, I wasn't even supposed to be here. I was his mistake, his burden. And yet he left me everything. You must hate me for that." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I did. For a long time, but now? No, I think I just pity you." That stung. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. But he didn't lash out. For once he just sat there, quiet, hollow, like a man who'd run out of lies. After a while, he said, "I met with the lawyer this morning. I told him I want to split the inheritance. Half for you, half for me." I turned to look at him. "You don't have to do that." He shook his head. "I do. You were right. About everything. I took advantage of him. I thought I could outsmart the world. and instead I just became the kind of man he'd always feared I'd be. I studied his face, trying to decide if this was another performance. But something about his voice, the way it cracked slightly at the end, felt real. "Do you really mean that?" I asked. He nodded. "I don't know if it'll make things right, but maybe it's a start." We sat in silence again. The wind carried the faint scent of wet soil, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded. Long, low, fading. "I found something else," I said after a moment. "In the workshop. Dad left it for me." He glanced at me warily. "What is it?" "Proof that he wanted me to have the workshop. The deeds are in my name." He blinked, then nodded slowly. "Then it's yours." He must have known you'd take care of it. There was no sarcasm in his voice this time, just resignation. "I'm not sure what I'll do with it yet," I admitted. "Maybe I'll fix it up. Maybe I'll sell it. But I think I finally understand what he wanted." Asher frowned. "What's that?" "For both of us to stop trying to earn what he should have given freely." He didn't reply. He just nodded, eyes glassy, as if holding back something fragile. When he finally stood to leave, he extended his hand. For a moment I hesitated, but then I took it. His grip was unsteady. "I'll send the paperwork tomorrow," he said. "All right." He turned to go, but paused at the gate. "You know, I don't think he ever really forgave himself. Maybe neither of us should keep trying to do it for him." I watched him walk away until his car disappeared around the corner. For the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. Still, not everyone saw it that way. By the end of the week, word had spread through the neighborhood about the inheritance scandal, the secret, the confrontation. Some relatives called it justice. Others called it family disgrace. I didn't argue with either. Let them talk. Let them pick sides. I'd spent too many years trying to control the story. Now I was just letting it breathe. Because deep down, I knew the truth didn't need defending anymore. It had already done what it was meant to do. Break us apart, so we could finally see what we were made of. Rumors spread fast in our town. By the second week, everyone knew some version of the story, each retelling more twisted than the last. Some said Asher forged the will, others claimed I'd blackmailed him. A few even whispered that our father had left secret riches buried somewhere in the workshop, and that we were fighting over it. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require my defense anymore. It had a way of revealing itself through the cracks of lies, quietly but persistently. Still, I saw the way people looked at Asher. The respect that used to follow him into every room had turned into something colder. Suspicion. He stopped showing up at gatherings. His phone number changed. The friends who used to orbit around his money and charm suddenly found new centers of gravity. For the first time, he was living in the silence he had once left me in. Meanwhile, I threw myself into fixing the workshop. It was slow, careful work. The walls were crumbling, the roof leaked in 3 places, and the floor was coated with years of dust and regret. But there was something healing in it, the rhythm of scrubbing, hammering, repairing. Each nail I drove in felt like sealing a wound. Some days I worked in total silence. Other days, I played Dad's old radio, the one that crackled between stations but somehow always found the right melody at the right time. I didn't do it for the business. I did it for memory, for peace, for closure. One afternoon, as I was repainting the front shutters, a car pulled up. I turned, half expecting a customer. But it was Asher. He stepped out, holding a box. His clothes were simpler now, almost modest. His expression carried none of the swagger I'd grown used to. "I brought something," he said. He walked inside and placed the box on the workbench. Inside were old photographs, papers, and a few of Dad's personal belongings. His wristwatch, his lighter, his favorite wrench. "These were with my things," he said quietly. "I figured they belonged here." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." He lingered for a moment, running his fingers across the dusty table. "You fixed the place up?" "A little," I said. It looks good, he murmured. Feels different now. There was a pause, not tense, just heavy with everything unspoken. I signed the papers, he said. The inheritance is split. You'll get your half by next week. I looked at him, searching his face for an angle, a trace of manipulation. But there was none. He looked tired, honestly tired, not theatrically so. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded. I don't want anything from him anymore. I just want to move on. I believed him this time. Before he left, he glanced around once more. You know, Dad used to bring me here when I was a kid, he said softly. I thought he liked me because I reminded him of himself. I never realized it was because he saw what he'd done and couldn't forgive it. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Some truths don't need responses. They just need witnesses. When he was gone, I stood there alone, staring at the items in the box. The watch still worked, faintly, stubbornly. The lighter sparked on the second try, and as the small flame flickered in the dim light, I whispered to the empty room, "You can rest now, Dad. It's over." But it wasn't really over. Not yet, because a week later, I received a letter from the lawyer again. He wanted me to come in, said there was a matter of clarification about the will. When I arrived, he handed me a thin envelope. This just came in, he explained. Your father gave it to me years ago, in case the family ever disputed the inheritance. I frowned and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting. If my sons ever stand in front of this desk, arguing about what I left behind, tell them this. I left them the same thing. One got my guilt. The other, my peace. I hope someday they learn to share. I stared at those words for a long time. When I finally looked up, the lawyer was watching me, his expression soft. He was a complicated man, he said quietly. I smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. Walking home, the sky began to rain. Not heavy, just enough to fill the air with that scent of renewal. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or grief or loss. I just felt still, like everything that had needed to happen had finally run its course. Dad had left me the truth, Asher the burden, and both of us the same question. What would we do with the love that came too late? Maybe that was his final lesson. That forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It's about deciding that you won't carry someone else's sin any longer. And as I locked up the workshop that evening, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a building. I was rebuilding us. Months passed, and with each one, the workshop began to feel less like a graveyard of memories and more like a place of beginnings. The air smelled of sawdust, oil, and fresh paint, scents that carried both familiarity and renewal. I spent my mornings sanding wood, repairing old machines, and my evenings sitting at the same desk where my father used to balance his ledgers. The silence that used to suffocate me had turned into something I cherished. It wasn't about fixing the shop anymore. It was about fixing what it represented. Sometimes when I'd pause for tea, I'd hear echoes of the past. Dad's deep voice, Asher's laughter, the metallic rhythm of hammers striking bolts. It wasn't haunting anymore. It was grounding, like a memory that had finally stopped bleeding. Asher and I didn't see each other often after that day in the workshop, but we spoke sometimes. Short calls, polite words, nothing deep but enough. He moved to another city, started working under someone instead of trying to lead. I think that humbled him more than anything else could. One afternoon, I got a message from him. It was a picture. A small rented apartment, bare walls, a single table, and a caption that simply read, "Starting fresh." I didn't reply immediately. I just looked at it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Good." Because for the first time, it felt like we weren't trapped in Dad's shadow anymore. We were both just people trying to live. I took the photo of my parents from the old study and hung it above the workbench. Mom's smile was soft, forgiving. Dad's eyes, as always, unreadable. But together, they looked at peace. That night, As I sat outside under the soft hum of crickets, I realized something. All my life I'd been searching for fairness, a balance, a justice that never came. I thought Dad's favoritism had stolen my worth. But in the end, the truth gave it back to me. He may have left Asher the wealth, but he left me the truth. And that was far heavier, far more sacred. I remember one evening, a young boy wandered into the workshop. He was maybe 12, curious and wide-eyed, holding a broken bicycle chain. "Can you fix this?" he asked shyly. I smiled. "I can try." He watched me work, small hands gripping the counter, eyes following every move. When I finished, I told him, "Sometimes things break not because they're weak, but because they were used too much." "Doesn't mean they can't work again," he nodded, smiling as he tested the chain. Before leaving, he asked, "Was this your dad's shop?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes. And now it's mine." He grinned. "Then you must be good like him." That simple sentence hit me deeper than I expected. For the first time, hearing my father's name didn't sting. It didn't carry anger or shame. It just belonged. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since before Dad's illness. Forgiveness isn't for the dead. It's for those left behind who keep carrying what should have been buried. I closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and let the quiet wrap around me. A few days later, the lawyer called again. Not about documents this time, just to check in. "It's been a while," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I replied. "Better, actually," he chuckled softly. "Your father once told me you were the quiet one, the one who watched, learned, and remembered. I think he knew you'd be the one to carry his truth properly." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Then I said, "Maybe that's why he left it to me." He laughed softly. "Maybe." When the call ended, I stood at the window, looking out at the fading sky. The light hit the workshop's metal sign just right, and for a brief second, it looked golden. Maybe that was the inheritance I was meant to have. Not the money, not the property, but the quiet dignity that comes when you stop needing anyone else's approval. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not joy exactly, but peace. A peace that didn't come from answers, but from acceptance. I looked up at the photo of my parents and said softly, "I think I understand now." Because in the end, my father's final lesson wasn't about fairness or family or legacy. It was about truth. How it can destroy, but also how it can rebuild. And as I turned off the lights and stepped out of the workshop that night, the last thing I heard was the faint ticking of his old wristwatch on the wall, still working, still marking time. It wasn't counting what was lost anymore. It was counting what remained. The months kept unfolding, slow and soft, like pages turning in a book I was finally learning to read without anger. Grief doesn't vanish. It settles. It finds corners to rest in, becoming part of your home, part of your silence. That's what happened to mine. It no longer shouted. It just was. Every morning, I'd open the workshop windows and let the light pour in. Dust would shimmer in the sunbeams, and I'd imagine it was all the words left unspoken between me and Dad, floating, fading, forgiving. One morning, while sweeping the floor, I found something wedged behind an old cabinet. It was a photograph, slightly torn, water-stained. It showed Dad, Mom, Asher, and me standing in front of the shop years ago. Mom's hand was resting on my shoulder, Dad's on Asher's. We both looked so young, two boys smiling because we didn't yet know what divided us. I stared at that photo for a long time. It was imperfect, faded, but it was proof. Proof that for a moment, however brief, we had been a family. Not by circumstance, not by secrets, but by love, however flawed. That evening, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since the funeral. The air was cool, the ground still damp from an earlier rain. I stood at Dad's grave for a while, not saying anything. The stone was simple, just his name, the dates, and a short phrase I'd chosen. He tried. I remember when the engraver asked if I was sure about those words. And I'd said, "Yes, because that's all any of us ever do, isn't it?" Now, standing there, I brushed the leaves off the headstone and whispered, "I know you did. Dad, I just wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me sooner." The wind picked up, gentle, carrying with it the faint smell of soil and jasmine. For the first time, I didn't feel that sharp ache of betrayal. I just felt empathy. He was a flawed man who'd made broken choices, but somewhere in that tangle of guilt and pride, he had still loved me, quietly, imperfectly. As I turned to leave, I saw a familiar figure in the distance, Asher. He stood a few rows away, flowers in hand. Our eyes met briefly. Neither of us waved, neither spoke. But we didn't need to. That small nod we shared was enough. It was acknowledgement of loss, of truth, of something like forgiveness. When I got back home, the evening sun had turned the workshop golden. I sat at Dad's old chair, the one that creaked the same way it always had, and opened the small metal box again. Inside, alongside the letters and papers, I placed the photograph I'd found. Then I locked it. Not to hide it, but to preserve it. To remind myself that some stories are meant to end quietly. As weeks passed, I started taking repair orders again. People brought in old fans, clocks, and small machines, things they couldn't part with, things that carried memories. I fixed them carefully, sometimes more slowly than needed, as if each screw I tightened was another attempt to keep time from falling apart. Neighbors began stopping by, some curious, some kind. They'd ask, "Is this Rashid Malik's old workshop?" And I'd smile and say, "Yes, but now, it's mine." They'd nod respectfully, sometimes sharing their memories of Dad, how he'd fixed their cars late at night, refused payment from struggling customers, or told stories about the early days when he had nothing but a wrench and a dream. Those stories, surprisingly, didn't hurt. They healed. Because they reminded me that the man I'd spent so long resenting wasn't defined by his failures alone. He was human, capable of both harm and kindness like all of us. I kept one of his habits, a small one. Every Friday evening, I'd brew tea, sit on the front step, and just listen to the world. No phone, no noise. Just the hiss of the kettle, the smell of earth cooling after the day's heat, and the sound of life moving forward. Sometimes I'd imagine him there beside me, sipping tea, silent, content. Other times I'd picture Mom smiling in that soft, patient way she used to, the kind that said, "I told you he loved you. You just had to see it for yourself." And maybe she was right, because love isn't always spoken. Sometimes it hides in the unspoken apologies, in the quiet gestures, in the things people leave behind when they don't know how to stay. Asher called again one night, just to talk. He said he'd been volunteering at a community center, helping kids learn mechanics. "Figured I'd do something decent for once," he said, half joking. I smiled. Dad would have liked that. He paused. "You think so?" "I know so. We didn't talk about the past." We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was a truce. After the call, I stepped outside. The moon hung low, silver and calm. The night smelled like oil and peace. Strange combination, I thought, but maybe fitting for a Malik. I realized something then. The real inheritance wasn't money or property or even the truth. It was the choice. The choice to stop letting the past decide the shape of our future. Dad had spent his life trying to correct a mistake. I wasn't going to spend mine trying to correct him. I whispered into the night. "We're okay now," and for the first time, I truly meant it. Sometimes, when I closed the workshop at night, I pause by the doorway and listen to the ticking of that old wristwatch on the wall, the one Dad left behind. It doesn't tick perfectly anymore. Sometimes it skips a beat, sometimes it slows down. But it never really stops, and maybe that's what families are like. Imperfect clocks. We lose time, we run fast, we slow down, but somehow we keep moving. I used to think my father's love had to look a certain way, equal, fair, spoken. But now I know love isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in silence, in mistakes, in guilt that still tries to make things right, even when it's too late. Dad's will gave Asher everything that could be counted. But what he left me couldn't be measured. The truth, the lesson, the peace that comes when you finally stop demanding justice from ghosts. Asher and I still talk, every once in a while. Not as rivals, not as half-brothers trying to prove something, just as two men who share the same shadow, and maybe finally, the same light. And when I think about my father now, I don't feel anger. I feel understanding. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a villain either. He was simply a man trying to make amends with time, with fate, with himself. I think that's all most of us ever do. Sometimes we inherit more than property or names. We inherit the unfinished stories of those who came before us. And it's up to us to decide how that story ends. For years, I thought my father's story ended with betrayal. Now I know it ends with forgiveness. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering and choosing not to let it define who you become. As I switch off the lights each night, I whisper a quiet prayer for him, for Mom, for Asher. And for myself, we all played our parts. We all broke something, and in our own ways, we all tried to fix it. So if you're listening to this and you're carrying a wound left by someone who should have protected you, let me tell you this. You don't have to carry it forever. Let it rest, because some truths once spoken don't need to be shouted. They just need to be lived. And if my father were here now, I think he'd smile. That small, tired smile he always had when he didn't know what to say. And he'd tell me, "You did all right, son. And maybe." That's all I ever needed to hear. Would you have done what I did? Would you have revealed the secret? Or let it die with him? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories, the kind that remind us that even in our brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found.